My name is Alex Saunders. I sit on the communications committee for Colorado Field Ornithologists, and I've been trying to organize some of our speaker series. And so before I introduce Dr. Conrey, I just want to let everybody know that we don't have a speaker for December. We're going to pick the series back up in January so that we can all have time to prepare for Christmas and New Year's and all the holidays going on. But without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Reesa Conrey, avian researcher for Colorado Parks and Wildlife since 2012. Dr. Conrey studies the interface between community ecology and population dynamics for species of conservation concern. And tonight she's going to be speaking about bald eagles in our backyard. So I'm going to step away and let Dr. Conrey share her screen, and we can all sit back and enjoy her talk.
All right, thank you. I am going to share my screen. Okay. Can somebody let me know if they are seeing that okay?
Yeah, that looks fine.
Perfect. Okay, well, thanks for that introduction, and thanks everybody for spending some of your Sunday night here with us. I'm going to talk to you about a fairly new research project. I guess it's not super new anymore. We're about 2 years in now to a research project on bald eagles in the Front Range. So we're looking at population trends, habitat use, and human impacts on our Front Range eagles. And I want to acknowledge all my co-authors. And in particular, I want to thank Miranda Middleton, who's a graduate student working on this project and has contributed quite a few of the maps and the figures and the photographs that I'm going to show. And Bruce Snyder with Bird Conservancy, who has been coordinating all the volunteers, collecting tons and tons of great nest data, and has been really quick to respond whenever we need anything. And also Mike Lockhart, who took the picture that you see here and took a bunch of other pictures, and has done such a great job trapping eagles for us. All right, so just to give you a little bit of background of how we got here and what we had before we started the research project. The state of Colorado has a statewide raptor nest database that's got more than 11,000 nest locations in it now of 30 species going back to 1975. And those data historically were used for a land use consultation. So working with the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, as well as cities, counties, partners, developers, folks who are interested in raptor data. We do have some buffer recommendations, buffer and seasonal recommendations that CPW updated in 2020 that talks about each of the different raptor species of concern, recommends no new infrastructure and no human activity encroachment within certain buffers during different times of the year, depending on the species. So we used the database to create the model that you see in the upper left of relative probability of use for bald eagles in the state of Colorado. And so those darker areas are areas where we expect to see more nests. You can see nest locations overlaid with the little black dots. And note particularly that in our region, that South Platte corridor is popping out, which is no surprise. And the data have been used less, but more often now, we hope, for statewide assessments. So the distribution model that we're looking at there, as well as things like trend and productivity. So today on the Colorado Front Range, as we all know, the human population is growing really fast. This statistic is actually a little bit outdated now. I bet it's even more. But as of a year or two ago, we had grown 18% just since 2000. And the Front Range was expected to host most of Colorado's future growth in the 2020s. And so of course, there's a lot of urban development that's ongoing. And the negative part of that is declining native habitat, things like prairie dog colonies that support raptor populations. The positive for a species like bald eagles is we have more open bodies of water with all the reservoirs that we've created, and more tree planting than we would usually get in parts of the Front Range that bald eagles need for nesting. Primarily, they're nesting in big cottonwoods that do well around our reservoirs, and also along streams. So with all that urban development, we have more visibility, more opportunities for conflict with species like bald eagles, and for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, a lot more land use consultations. So one of our land use coordinators told me when we started this project that just he himself, not even counting other people in our agency, was getting some sort of request for data or a request for a consultation for bald eagles every other day, basically all year long. So of course it's a plus that we have more people seeing bald eagles and enjoying bald eagles. They're certainly an awesome species for watchable wildlife, but also more conflict. So bald eagles were in a pretty bad place in the 1960s and 70s, along with lots of other raptors, primarily due to DDT. So we had our all-time low was reached around that time. And then bald eagles were protected by the Golden Bald Eagle Protection Act and the Endangered Species Act, and their numbers slowly increased. So these are figures that the Fish and Wildlife Service put out, showing that just in the last decade, so since 2009, we have approximately a doubling in the number of bald eagle breeding pairs in the contiguous US. And then the figure on the right shows you the numbers in different regions of the US. So that's a pretty rapid recovery. And it has continued from the time that bald eagles were delisted from the ESA in 2007. So this is a figure just for Colorado. So it shows the number of known occupied bald eagle nests starting back in 1975. So the blue line is statewide, and the red line is northern Front Range counties that are part of our study area. And so these are known nests, not all nests. It's an index, not an estimate. Not all nests were monitored in all years. Those are just some of the caveats of the data, because they are observational data. They don't come from a standardized sort of a survey process. But you can see a pretty, an increase, a definite increase that seems like it's accelerating. It looks almost like an exponential curve. So it mirrors what we saw for the continental US in the previous figure. Okay, so our objective for the research is to assess bald eagle populations and habitat use in this rapidly changing human-dominated landscape. So we are interested in what types of human disturbances are happening, what sorts of natural habitats are being used, what types of disturbances are well tolerated by eagles that they seem to be habituated to, which disturbances are not being tolerated so well, and then what's responsible for the variation that we know is out there. So we have some nests that are more rural, some nests that are more urban. We hypothesize that the history of the nest and the area surrounding the nest is going to have some impact. So we have some territories that have been established for a long time, others that are newer, and we have some infrastructure that's been around for a long time, and we have things that are rapidly changing, and some things that particular pairs of eagles won't have had a lot of experience with, perhaps. So the four major parts of this project are to estimate breeding success via nest observations. So we have volunteers and staff collecting tons and tons of data, which is great because we would never be able to collect that just on our own. Quantify human-related disturbance, and that comes from both the direct observations at the nest as well as landscape analysis using GIS. Number 3, analyzing movement and habitat use at more rural versus more urban sites and everything along that gradient via transmitter data. So the bald eagle on the right that you see here actually has a transmitter. He was recently tagged when the picture was taken. And of course, to inform conservation and land management to benefit eagles. So we have the best available science informing those decisions. So for goal number 1, we're monitoring our bald eagle population and trying to estimate breeding success. So nests are monitored at least every 2 weeks. Some are monitored more frequently than that. And since we started the project, we've been really emphasizing trying to get a handle on when nests are initiated. So when they lay eggs and start incubating the first egg, all the way through hatching and to fledging and beyond. Actually, we have some nests that are being monitored periodically throughout the fall and winter as well, and creating nest histories going back over time. So the picture you see here is from a nest that's somewhat more easy to monitor because it's the Fort St. Vrain nest that has a webcam on it. So this picture was taken in March of 2020 when we had that huge snowstorm, and we watched the bald eagles continuing to sit on eggs and keep incubating throughout that snowstorm. So I put a picture of Miranda here just to point out that this is one of the figures that she's responsible for. So going back to 2016, these are the nests that we know about and that we've been monitoring along with the help of all of our partners and volunteers in the Front Range. And you can see that every year more and more of them are popping up. So just going back to 2016, when we feel like the data have been more consistently collected and more similar to the way they're being collected today. The top figure shows nest numbers and the bottom figure shows nest success. So the blue line is all the nests that were monitored, whereas the orangey red colored line is just nests that were actually initiated. So that top line would include alternate nest structures where they only lay eggs in one or the other, whereas the bottom line are those that are actually initiated, meaning that they lay eggs and make a nest attempt. So this last year, 184 nests were monitored, including alternate structures and some that were destroyed during the nesting season. 113 were initiated by pairs in 2022. And then looking at that bottom figure, this is a parent nest success. So directly coming from observations, not from a daily nest survival model at this point. The number of the percent of successful nests per year varies over time, but not a ton for the most part. The reason that there's a blue line and a red line is because there's some uncertainty. There's some nests that always have an uncertain fate. But you can see since we started the research in 2020, those two lines have converged. So there's been less uncertainty about the fate of nests since then. So if we average all these years together, the lower line is around 72% and the upper line is around 84%. 2022 was definitely a downward blip. So it was the lowest rate that we had seen since 2016, and I'll talk about the reasons for that in just a minute, but it's somewhere around 20% lower than average. So this was the reason we hypothesize. Highly pathogenic avian influenza arrived in our region in mid-March. So the Colorado outbreak began with snow geese in Sedgwick County. It definitely picked up in April and May, but slowed down after that. So it tends to be carried by waterfowl. And so as waterfowl were migrating through and into our region, we think that was what was responsible for the uptick. And when they moved elsewhere during the summer, rates went down for a while. So in the northern Colorado Front Range, we had about a 20% decline. This is fairly consistent, I think, with what other states have found. So the reason I said hypothesized is being related to the bald eagle declining in nest success this year is because we had a hard time collecting carcasses. So we only actually have 2 HPAI positive results for eagles in Colorado. The first one was an eaglet in Adams County that tested positive when collected in April. So we were lucky to get that carcass. Mike Lockhart was going out to set a trap at that particular nest and happened to find a dead eaglet on the ground that either fell out or was pushed out and was a fresh enough carcass that was able to be swabbed successfully and tested. We had volunteers and staff working really hard to try to collect eaglet carcasses at other nests where we suspected, because the eaglets got to a pretty advanced age in some cases before they died and just seemed like they died all of a sudden. And we had more of them than usual. And we had these nest failures at a fairly advanced stage at nests that are typically pretty reliable. So not just newer nests that often fail, but some pretty reliable pairs. But a lot of times they died in the nest and we were never able to retrieve them, or as the weather heated up, we had a really short window to collect carcasses and get a good swab on them, and we weren't always able to do that. We did then get a call about a dead adult eagle that was picked up in Larimer County in October that tested positive. And we didn't have a tag on that bird, but we did on the male, on her mate. So other than that bird, though, that we didn't have any other adults that even appeared to be sick, including the tag birds that I'll talk about in a minute. So that was kind of the silver lining, is we had a poor year for nest success, but at least over the spring and summer weren't losing adults. Okay, so goal number 2 is to quantify human-related disturbance and eagle responses to those disturbances. So we have short-term, more acute types of threats, and also long-term, more habitat-modifying types of threats like infrastructure. And so we're looking at an eagle that's near its nest here, and we see a bunch of the typical things that we see around eagle nests in the Front Range, with roads and cars and people watching and photographing. We've got power lines in the background. We've got some construction equipment on one side. We've got houses in the background. And so we're looking at quantifying effects of all those types of disturbances separately, as well as creating an index from GIS layers. And so our previous spatial ecologist, Kevin Agard, put this together using these 7 different layers that you see listed on the left. And so as we get more light colored pixels showing up decade by decade from 1990 to 2020, we see more development in this region. And then we've just overlaid all the nests that were present in 2020 in the background, just so you could get an idea of what things were like surrounding those nests. So goal number 3, I'm going to spend most of my time on the transmitter data from here on out. So we're looking at movement and habitat use along this rural to urban gradient. And so far, we have tagged 29 bald eagles with GPS GSM transmitters. And so you can see in the lower picture what the transmitter looks like. It's fairly low profile. It's fairly low weight. So it's around 1% of the weight of a typical adult male bald eagle, and the males are smaller than the females. You can see what that looks like on a newly released bird here. So you can just barely make out the little rectangle on the bird's back. They're attached via a backpack harness. So the GPS part of it stands for a global positioning system, and the GSM part of it stands for a global system for mobile communications, which means that these tags call in using cell towers. And another nice feature of them, aside from their small size, is that they don't have a big antenna sticking out of them. and they're able to give us pretty frequent locations. So out of those 29 tags we've put out, we've got 23 on adults, pretty even between male and females. 21 of those were breeders. 2 turned out to be non-breeders that we caught in the late fall and winter. Thought we had the breeding adult, but turned out to be a wintering adult instead. We've tagged 1 subadult and 5 juveniles. So the whole back of the tag is a solar panel. So you can see in that lower image that it's not a really shiny solar panel. It's got a matte finish on it, which is nice for the eagles. So they're not sort of reflective and glaring in the sunlight. We hope that they'll provide data for between 2 and 5 years. The harnesses are breakaway. So if something happens or if the eagle just doesn't like the tag, they can come off. They're designed that way. And the locations are transmitted every day via the cellular network. So we get fixes depending on the duty cycle that we can set, anywhere from every 4 seconds to hourly if the tag is having a voltage problem and we need to turn down the fix rate. So this just shows you where my birds were located fairly recently. So most of them are in Colorado. The figure on the right shows the birds that we had tagged at the beginning of the nesting season this year, just kind of approximately where they were in the Front Range. Of those 29 units we've put out, we've had 5 mortalities. We've had 3 tags that came off of the birds that we were able to recover. So those were birds that just decided they didn't want to wear their tags anymore and got them off. And then the first 4 tags we put out were 3G tags. Now in the Front Range of Colorado, most of our cell towers don't use 3G anymore. They use 4G now. So one of those tags isn't calling in very much anymore, unfortunately, and isn't providing great data anymore. The other 3 birds have called in primarily because they've moved into areas that still have 3G. So we've got 20 units that are still providing us with good data as of November. So this is a comparison of 2 adult males over approximately the same time of year. So this is springtime when they both had nestlings to feed. The figure on the left is our most rural territory and the figure on the right is our most urban territory. And thanks to Miranda for coming up with these numbers. But on the left, we have an area within a half a mile of this nest that's got 3 people. The most urban territory, we're talking about orders of magnitude more, so 3,325 people in a half a mile. The other difference is that on the left, we're getting a fix every 15 minutes. So you can see what that looks like versus getting a fix every 30 seconds, like the bird on the right. So this is a different adult male. Again, kind of same time frame in the spring. So this is one day in his life when he also had young nestlings to feed. But here we're looking at a fix every 4 seconds. So you can see that even if you zoom in, it looks like a pretty continuous line of fixes. So that lets us figure out exactly where the bird was and what he was up to. So this is our most urban bird. Again, this is what he looked like when he was trapped. It's a little bit later in the season when he was trapped. So he's looking a little rough because he's had a hard spring and summer of trying to feed nestlings. This was post-fledge, but pre-dispersal. So Miranda made this figure to point out what a movement path looks like for one day when this bird had flown a total of 100 kilometers or a little bit more, but actually never went more than 9 kilometers from his nest. So those were all males that I've been showing you. This is an adult female, and it's the first bird that we tagged. Generally, we're finding that the females are moving less than the males during the nestling period. And while both sexes will sometimes take a hiatus or a vacation from their territories, the females tend to do it a little bit sooner, sometimes even after they're out of the nest, but before the fledglings actually disperse. So to give you an idea of what this looks like, The blue polygon on the right is a minimum convex polygon drawn around her locations from late summer and fall of 2020. And then the yellow line shows the first ever vacation that we witnessed of a tagged bird when she went up into Wyoming. And then 2 days later, she came back again. So we see something extremely different from our non-territorial birds. So these are maps of 2 juvenile females that we tagged. The one that's in the middle of your screen was tagged in 2021, and the one on the right hand was tagged just this summer in 2022. So there's one of the juveniles with its parent there in the picture. So the one in the middle, in just 10 days, she went from northern Colorado and got all the way up to Lake Winnipeg. And she did that around 6 weeks post-fledge. That's what's pretty typical for our fledglings, is dispersal at around 6 weeks. That's a pretty remarkable rate of travel. The bird on the right this summer took 9 days to get from northern Colorado to the northernmost point that you see up there in Alberta. And then she took 3 more days to go eastward to where she ended up there. And the interesting thing about her is that she didn't just stay for a couple of weeks and then keep moving around. She actually stayed in the southern part of that lake for 3 months. And she stayed for a long time. She didn't actually depart until November 8th. And I spoke to people at the Beaver Hill Bird Observatory up there who hypothesized that she followed the last goose south just before things really, really got cold. So this is a juvenile male that we tagged in 2021, and he's somewhat of a famous bird because he was hatched from the Fort St. Vrain nest where there's a webcam. So he's also known as FSV 44. And we've been tracking his movements and posting some of these maps and videos to social media. And so I'm gonna stop my screen share for a minute to show you this video that we put together for his Happy Hatch Day, which was Easter of this year. And hopefully this video is gonna run for you guys. So hopefully you're seeing the black line. Somebody jump in and tell me if you're not seeing it. But he dispersed in August 2021. You see he headed up to Wyoming. Unlike those females who jumped straight up to Canada, the 2 males, juvenile males that we've tagged so far have not gone any further than Wyoming. So we kind of tooled around in sort of south central, southeast Wyoming. And then around October, November, he came back down to Colorado for the winter. And at one point, he actually flew over his natal nest, but he didn't stop. But he hung around not too far away from his natal nest, within a mile or 2 for a good chunk of the winter. So now we're at January, February. And he's starting to move around a little bit more. And in March, he started his first year dispersal. So he jumped up to Nebraska, and then up into South Dakota. And eventually he made his way up into North Dakota. And that's where he was on his Happy Hatch Day 2022. He stopped just shy of the Canadian border. All right, I'm going to stop sharing that and go back to my PowerPoint. Okay, hopefully everybody's back to my PowerPoint again.
Yep, looks good.
Okay, awesome. All right, so this map starts when that video ended, pretty much. So it goes in reverse rainbow order. So April is in the purple. And then, so you see, he was in North Dakota in April where that video ended. And then in May, he made his own trip up to Canada. So in just about 2 weeks, he got almost all the way to Hudson Bay, but he didn't stay all that long. He hung around in there for a couple of weeks. He was up in Canada for less than 2 months. And in the green, you see that's June. He started heading back down. By July, August, he was back down into Montana. And then he came back down into Wyoming in September. And by October, he was back to the Northern Colorado Front Range, which is where he is right now. So I find it interesting that he made kind of a similar trip to what the juvenile females did, but he didn't do it until he was a first-year bird. So Miranda made this figure. I put it in here just to note what she's doing for her thesis. So she's going to be focusing on home range size and foraging site selection. So this map shows 3 breeding males that have adjacent territories. 2 of them failed this year, possibly, but not confirmed due to HPAI. And then one of them who has actually what looks like the smallest area that he was occupying during the active nesting season is here on the right. So just an example of how she's mapping out use and looking at home range size as well as identifying foraging hotspots. Okay, so just a quick summary of results so far. I mean, the research is still ongoing. We're still tagging birds. And so it's going to be a while before we have accomplished all the things we want to accomplish with the research. But we know now that our breeding adults are resident just about year round, other than the hiatuses that they take or the vacations that they take. Some of them are gone just for a couple of days, like the yellow track that I showed you for that adult female. But some are gone for longer. Some of them have been gone for months. Mostly they're doing that in late summer and fall. And mostly they're either going west or northwest into the mountains. A lot of them seem to like Poudre Canyon and the Red Feather area, as well as the Laramie River up in Wyoming. Others don't leave. They hardly ever go more than 5 kilometers from the nest. And although we haven't fully analyzed all the foraging data and all the location data, we can tell that they're spending a lot of time near water and prairie dog colonies, which is not surprising. I mean, bald eagles are generalists and they eat all kinds of things, including turkeys and seagulls, rabbits, but we can see that they're spending a lot of time at prairie dog colonies, especially in the winter when some other food sources are a little harder to come by. And of course, like you would expect for a bald eagle, they're definitely fishing quite a bit. Our non-breeders are ranging really widely, like I showed you, through Colorado, Wyoming, and even farther north. And then the 5 mortalities thus far, we have been able to recover all those birds and all of their transmitters. We've had 1 electrocution, 1 possible but not confirmed electrocution, 1 bird that died from West Nile virus. She also had high lead but sublethal lead levels. We've had 1 that had very, very high lead levels and was confirmed lead toxicity. And then we have 1 that remained unknown because despite the fact that we've got these great transmitters and he was a front range bird who actually died in the front range, he ended up in a little hole with really poor cell reception and wasn't found until 3 weeks after death. So the necropsy wasn't able to confirm what he had died from. So future plans, we're still deploying tags. We'd like to get another 5 to 10 tags out at least and redeploy tags that come back either because the eagles dropped them or because of mortalities. We want to get more years of nest observation data and tag data because we're really interested in what happens with birds in a successful year versus a failure year. And as the landscape continues to change and we get new construction going on, we want to continue to see how these eagles are responding and what they're doing. So I already mentioned Miranda's thesis and what she's doing with home range and foraging hotspots and looking at the impacts of natural and anthropogenic features. And of course, Miranda's project is a master's. It's a 2.5-year project. the work that CPW is doing along with Bird Conservancy and all of our partners will go on beyond that. And so we're able to look at more kind of long-term questions like what sources of disturbance are tolerated and what aren't. And we're looking specifically at occupancy of nests and productivity of nests, as well as the movement paths that our tagged eagles are taking, whether they're using or avoiding certain areas within their territories, and then what the impact is of the surrounding landscape. We might hypothesize that a more rural bird where disturbances might be a more novel thing versus a more urban bird might be more habituated to certain types of disturbance. We think that that might have an impact, as well as the history of the nest, how long the territory has been there, versus land use. So a new change versus something that happened a longer time ago. And then we're interested in these hiatuses and important foraging areas that birds are using at certain times of the year beyond the territory. And we know that the season of the year makes a big impact as well. So we're looking at breeding season versus non-breeding season. And then going back to those 4 goals I mentioned, of course, in the end, the most important thing is that the science be used to inform conservation and management. So we put out a press release in July of 2021. We've also put out some social media posts. I've done some presentations and some interviews. We collaborate with lots of partners. The data we hope will continue to be used to support land use consultations, CPW's recommendations, and rule reviews that are going on now with Fish and Wildlife Service. And we do have another 2 years of work to do, at least, just in terms of data collection, and then of course lots and lots of analysis to do. But I just want to thank everybody, in particular all the volunteers who are so crucial to the project, to collecting all the nest data, private landowners who have been kind enough to give us access to get observations and also to trap birds on their properties. Mike Lockhart, who's been so awesome capturing birds for us, all the CPW staff, Denver Audubon's Lois Webster Fund that helped us purchase a couple transmitters, federal agencies, counties, municipalities, cities have been really great partners for us. So we've got birds tagged in Loveland, Aurora, Longmont, Fort Collins, Windsor, and we've had companies, Coors, Denver Water, Excel that have given us access as well. So thanks to all those folks. And if you guys can help me with the chat, I can take some questions, or I don't know if you want people to just speak up. Alex, I'll turn it over to you for that.
Sure thing. Thank you, Dr. Conrey. We had a couple questions already come through chat, and so let's get those taken care of, and then we can allow people, if they want to unmute, maybe take some questions there as well. So the first one was, have we seen any issues concerning windmill farms injuring or killing raptors?
So definitely we know that turbines, especially big turbines, can be a risk to raptors. We don't have a lot of turbines here in the Front Range. So in the Northern Front Range, I don't know to what degree we'll be able to incorporate that as part of our study, because we just don't have the big turbines down here. So our birds might be exposed to them if they leave the Front Range, but not so much here.
Sure. And then one of the other questions was, what are the sources of lead toxins to eagles, and do you test for mercury levels as well?
So yeah, we are collecting blood from all the eagles that we capture is to get them tested for lead and for other elements, including mercury. I don't think I have results back from the birds that we've captured in 2022, but we did have some elevated lead from birds that were captured in 2021, including one bird that appeared to have really high, quite lethal levels of lead, and despite that, survived with it. There was a paper that came out, Slave et al., last year that I think is really informative about lead toxicity. But in terms of what the sources might be, I mean, we can speculate, but that's not something that I'm addressing with this study. But we think that it's probably gut piles if there's lead shot that was used and it's left out there. Eagles will definitely scavenge, as well as stealing food from other birds. There could be other sources. There could be environmental sources, non-point sources. There could be fishing tackle. If people are shooting prairie dogs, potentially with lead shot, that could be another source.
Yeah, there's lots of opportunity for them, unfortunately, to ingest it, I imagine. Another question was, what was the nesting success? What is the nesting success of rural versus urban birds? Are you seeing a difference? Is it too early to tell?
That's a good question. I don't think we haven't analyzed the data that way, so I can't really say. I don't anticipate that we're going to see that happening, though. I mean, the birds that are in those urban areas, especially the territories that have been there for a while, tend to be those that seem sort of tolerant to what's going on around them, and we definitely see them being successful. So it's not like all of our urban territories are sinks and our rural territories are sources of eaglets. We definitely see birds in both types of territories being successful. So one thing that we really want to do with our tag data is to try to get tags on eagles in areas that are being developed right now, so that some of the things that are happening will be a more novel source of disturbance, to see if that makes any difference. But our urban birds are definitely being successful. They're definitely successfully fledging eaglets.
Okay. And we had a request for maybe a link to that article on lead poisoning that you mentioned in eagles. If you don't have it handy, we can get that from you through an email, and I can send it out or post it up on the website.
Okay.
That might be the easiest way to
Yeah,
get
I mean,
it.
I can definitely find it for you, or if there's somebody else on right now that has the link to it, they can post it in the chat. I'm not sure if that was an open access article or not. I can't remember.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, send me an email later.
Okay.
I had a question. So what it looked at about a decade ago, maybe 12 years ago, that Colorado really saw that increase in bald eagles in the state. What do we have a feeling of what allowed that to happen? Are those eagles that are migrating in from other flyways or other areas, or are they returning juveniles that found habitat in which they could nest? Or
yeah, I don't know if there was something special about 10 or 12 years ago or not. I mean, it could just be that eagles were at such extremely low numbers that it took a while for the change to occur and for them to build back up to the point where you had a high enough density for birds to find each other and form mated pairs and occupy new territories. So back in the 1970s, depending on the year you're talking about, we only knew of about 3 or 4 nests in the entire state that were occupied. And in the Front Range, we didn't have any until 1986, when that Bar Lake nest was first used. So, I mean, that's my guess, rather than anything special happening 10 or 12 years ago, but I don't know for sure.
And then we had one other question come in that was, is there anything we can do to prevent the spread of the avian flu that we were seeing in the waterfowl, the snow geese that came in?
I mean, there's nothing we can do to keep HPAI out of waterfowl, or really direct where they're going. I mean, people can work to protect backyard poultry flocks if they have any, but it's really limited what we can do about HPAI. The picture that I had up there is a fact sheet that Parks and Wildlife put out, and you can also find resources from CDC and other places if you look it up on the web, so folks could check out those to see if there are other recommendations. But we can't really control where waterfowl go, and as much as I would like to tell my bald eagles to not eat the sick, or potentially not sick, but just positive carrier waterfowl, they don't listen. So
yeah. And it sounds, at least from a birder's perspective, as far as passerines go, as far as backyard bird feeders, that's not really what we're worried about. I mean, of course, we need to, be diligent about cleaning our feeders and getting rid of spoiled seed and things like that. But it doesn't look like, it looks like the avian flu that you were speaking of is primarily waterfowl kind of associated with a little bit of edge cases in raptors and things like that. Is that correct? Or
Yeah, I mean, there have been quite a few cases in raptors, just not so much bald eagles in Colorado.
Sure.
Of course, there could be lots of bald eagle mortalities that we just haven't found. So nobody
Yeah.
turned in the carcass and they didn't get necropsied, or we had a carcass, but it wasn't fresh enough to swab. So during the summer, we had maybe 48 hours to get swabs before it was no longer
Yeah.
possible to
Okay.
test for HPAI.
Yeah.
But we know that there are some species that have had much higher rates confirmed. So particularly great horned owls and turkey vultures, red-tailed hawks. There are other species that have shown up of raptors, as well as a few other types of species, a few corvids that were positive, but mostly it's been waterfowl and raptors. And there is a USDA site that will tell you all the confirmed positive cases in wild birds. That's just publicly available, and you can sort through it state by state if folks want to check that out.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Do you know, is anybody studying the bald eagles across the entire state? I know you're focused mostly on the Front Range and the human interaction, but is anybody that you know of looking out statewide as far as nesting success and population and that kind of thing?
So we have staff and some volunteers and partners that are monitoring nests across the state. So we aren't putting tags on birds in those other areas, but in terms of the other type of data collection from nest observations, that is going on statewide.
Sure. All right. Does anybody have any other questions they want to throw in chat? That seems to be a little bit easier than maybe opening up your mic. But if not, we're getting close to 8 p.m. and I know a lot of us have to work tomorrow. So I really want to thank you, Dr. Conrey. This has been excellent. I have a little story. I grew up on the west coast of Canada, salmon runs. I'm a fisheries biologist by trade. I moved down here about 25 years ago, and I was just amazed at how many people were excited about bald eagles, because back where I grew up, you'd see 30 or 40 in a tree during the salmon runs. And it was amazing how important they are to people in Colorado. I mean, every time I go birding, people stop and point them out, and it's really interesting to see, having grown up where it was like, oh, there's another bald eagle. You're kind of spoiled in that regard. So
definitely.
So yes, another question just came in. Can you tell when you're tracking the birds with your GPS data and your cellular data, how often are they feeding when they're on a, maybe you can't tell that by the data, but how often are they feeding on a multi-day trip like that up to, central Canada in Winnipeg and places like that?
Yeah, I don't know, because we haven't tried to do that with the data yet. I mean,
sure,
the tags do have an altitude. They do report altitude, and they also report activity. So you can tell, like, if a bird is accelerating and taking off. I mean, they have some capabilities like that we haven't used, but I suspect that for the most part, we'd be looking at times when the eagles spent more time in a certain spot. I mean, typically around here, we see them perching on, power poles and cottonwood trees with really good visibility. And I think we'll probably be looking for places where they're spending more time, where they're perching a lot, and then looking at what's there. Is it a reservoir where there might be fishing? Is it a prairie dog colony? In terms of those hiatus trips and what they're doing when they're in Canada, yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's
Also, I'm a little less familiar with the areas up there. I mean, I know the one who just went up to Beaver Hill, I was told that there was just tons and tons and tons of waterfowl. And that's
Yeah.
probably why our birds stayed in like almost the same spot for 3 months and then followed the geese when they left again. So there's, you know, a definite assumption that she was filling up on those up there. But yeah, in terms of exactly what they're eating, I mean, really, we would just be making an inference based on where they were spending time rather than knowing for sure what they were consuming.
Sure. You can only get so much data. I mean, you can get so much data that it's overwhelming, but then you can also only get so much data in a narrow path with that kind of tracking and things like that. Do you know, there was another question, do you know if anybody or yourself has plans on studying golden eagles within Colorado or the Front Range area?
So we're definitely really focused on golden eagles because they're a species of conservation concern. They're on our tier 2 list of species of greatest conservation need. And so we're focusing a lot with our statewide monitoring on trying to get people to go to golden eagle nests, especially historic territories where we maybe don't have any data in the last 10 or 20 years. So we're doing nest observations as much as we can on golden eagle nests. We're not tagging golden eagles in the state right now, but Fish and Wildlife Service, working with their partners, has put out a lot of tags on goldens. So Mike Lockhart, who's trapping balds for us down here, is putting tags on golden eagles, mostly up in Wyoming. But there's places across our region where golden eagles have been tagged. So if folks are interested in that, they might look up. There's some papers on golden eagles that came out of those studies, and they could check out Fish and Wildlife Service's website to look at that. I mean, the only other thing that we're doing aside from the nest observations for goldens here is we have piloted some flights to try to get better survey data, including not just presence but absence. And just using a more standardized method to try to get nest density for golden eagles in the southeast. So we've tested that out using both fixed wing. CPW has some Cessnas, and we also contracted 1 year to do some helicopter surveys. But we don't have any plans to put tags on goldens right now.
Yeah. Well, I think that looks like it, and we're right at 8 o'clock. So I'm going to say thank you very much once again on behalf of Colorado field ornithologists and our members. We really appreciate you spending the time to give us a little bit of education on bald eagles in our Front Range.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate everybody joining us and spending the time to listen, and check back with us in a couple of years, and hopefully we'll have more answers for you.
Definitely. And for those of you still on, I'm going to do a little bit of looking, see if I can get those links for you and maybe pop them up on our Facebook page or Instagram, or we'll get them to you somehow. So